The humid New Orleans air, thick with the scent of jasmine and decay, pressed in on me as I watched the black sedan disappear down the oak-lined street. I just dropped them at Louis Armstrong International, my daughter Ava, and her husband Julian. They were on their way to a week-long tour of Napa Valley vineyards, a trip I had meticulously planned and paid for. The first-class flights, the boutique hotel overlooking the rolling hills, the private wine tastings, every last detail, every single cent was mine. I had even packed Julian's ridiculously specific activated charcoal toiletries myself. I stood in the grand foyer of our Garden District home, the silence of the high ceilings amplifying the frantic beat of my own heart. My phone vibrated in my hand, a text from Ava. My breath caught. "You won't be joining us. Julian prefers we keep it intimate, just family." The words blurred. I read them again, and a third time. Just family. The phrase was a surgical blade expertly severing me from the very definition of the word. I, the woman who gave her life, was not family. I was an accessory, a sponsor, a travel agent, and now an inconvenience. They had used me to get what they wanted and then cut the cord with the cold precision of a text message. I didn't shatter. Something far more terrifying happened. A chilling, crystalline clarity settled over me. I walked from the foyer, my steps echoing on the heart pine floors, and went into my late husband's study. From the bottom drawer of his mahogany desk, I retrieved a thick, sealed manila envelope. Inside lay the deed to this house, the house Robert and I had poured our souls into restoring. It was signed over to me, and only me, in an ironclad trust. Ava didn't know that. She and Julian assumed with the blissful arrogance of youth that the house had passed to her. I had let them believe it, told them I would make things simple after her father passed. That was my mistake. That was before Julian had hollowed my daughter out and built a shrine to himself in her place. I stared down at the envelope, my hand perfectly steady. "So you prefer to keep it intimate," I whispered to the empty, silent room. "All right. Let's see how intimate you can get without a roof over your heads." It wasn't always like this. Ava, my Ava, used to be my sunlight. She had a laugh that could chase the shadows from the gloomiest corners of this old house. After Robert died, I thought we would cling to each other like life rafts. And for a while, we did. But then she married Julian. I first felt the shift in temperature when he came for dinner. He surveyed my cooking with the detached air of a food critic. When I offered him more of my crawfish étouffée, a recipe passed down through 3 generations, he waved a dismissive hand. "No thank you, Clara. The roux is a bit heavy for my palate. Weird, but fine. Everyone's a critic." Then, after they moved in to help me manage the big house, the subtle critiques became directives. My antique cypress furniture was cluttered. The wisteria in the courtyard was unruly. My presence, it was slowly made clear, was an interruption. So I retreated. I moved into the small garçonnière out back, the 2-room dependency we once used for guests. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself they were a young couple needing space to nest. I told myself lies. Soon they stopped inviting me into the main house for meals. I'd watch from my small window as they hosted lavish dinner parties for Julian's insufferable friends from the art gallery he managed. I could hear their laughter drifting across the courtyard, mingling with the jazz music playing from my speakers. They used my silverware, drank from my crystal, all while I sat alone, an exile on my own property. The final, unforgivable blow came 3 days before the Napa trip. Ava knocked on my door, a rare occurrence, and handed me a printed itinerary. "Mom, everything's booked. Julian and I will meet you at the airport," she'd said, a brittle smile on her face, a flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe this is it, I thought. Maybe we're healing. I packed my bags. I bought a new dress. I even got a facial, because Julian had once remarked that my skin looked a bit tired. The morning of the trip, I wheeled my suitcase to the front porch, my heart light with anticipation. Ava came out, looking chic and distant. Julian followed, a smug smile playing on his lips. "Change of plans, Mom," she said. her eyes glued to her phone as she summoned their Uber. "We're just heading out a bit early. Traffic, you know. We'll see you there." I nodded, confused but still clinging to that fragile thread of hope. I watched them get into the car, and then, as the car turned the corner, the text arrived. The text that detonated my world. Just family. Now, sitting in Robert's study, I looked at the deed. I never told Ava, but her father knew. He saw the predator in Julian long before I was willing to. A week before he died, he pressed this envelope into my hands. "If he ever tries to freeze you out, Clara," Robert had warned, his voice weak but his eyes fierce. "You have my full permission to burn the whole thing to the ground. I never thought I'd have to light the match." I picked up the phone and dialed Mr. Henderson, the discreet realtor who had been a family friend for decades. "Mark," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "List it, effective immediately, and find me a buyer who appreciates history, not just square footage." For the next week, while they were sipping Chardonnay in the California sun, I orchestrated the quiet dismantling of their lives. I remained in the garçonnier, a silent spider in the center of a web they didn't know they were caught in. The house was shown to a select few. An offer was made, a generous one, from a Tulane professor and his wife, who fell in love with the home's original character. Papers were drawn up. Contracts were signed. When Ava's car pulled up to the curb a week later, they were tan and smiling, but their smiles froze as they saw it. There, staked into the front lawn, was a large, unequivocal sign with a single brutal word in bold red letters: "Sold." I watched from my window as Julian leapt from the car, his face a mask of fury. "What the hell is this?" he bellowed. Ava stood paralyzed, her gaze slowly lifting until her eyes met mine through the glass. There was no triumph in my expression, only the vast, empty calm of a tidal wave that has already done its work. She stormed up the brick path, her heels clicking angrily, and pounded on my door. "Mom, what is this? What have you done?" I opened the door slowly, holding my phone in my hand. "You must mean, what have I done with my property?" "This is illegal," Julian barked from behind her, his voice cracking with panic. I held up a crisp, notarized copy of the deed. "Actually," I said, my voice as soft as silk, "it's perfectly legal. Robert left everything to me." "But you said," Ava choked out, her face draining of all color. "I said I would make things simple," I corrected her gently. "I never, ever said I would make myself disposable." "Our things, our furniture, my wedding photos," she demanded, her voice rising with hysteria. "All carefully packed and moved to a climate-controlled storage unit in your name. I even paid for the first 3 months. The key is in the mail." "Why?" she whispered, the fight finally draining out of her, leaving only a raw, gaping wound of confusion. "Why would you do this to us?" I didn't need to answer. She knew why. "You're a vindictive, crazy old woman," Julian spat. "No," I said, looking past him and directly at my daughter. "I'm just done being a ghost in my own home." I closed the door, the solid click of the lock echoing the finality of my decision. Behind it, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was Mr. Henderson, offer finalized. Funds will be transferred by end of day. I looked around the small garçonniere. It was cramped, yes, but it was peaceful. It was quiet. And it was, finally and completely, mine. The silence that followed the closing of the door was a living entity. It was heavier and more profound than their shouting had been. I stood in the center of the small room, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, but my hands were rock steady. For the first time in 2 years since Robert was gone, I felt a sense of equilibrium. Outside, I could hear their voices rising and falling in sharp, frantic bursts of anger and disbelief. It was all just noise now, the static of a life I was no longer tuned into. A door had closed, not just the physical one between me and them, but a metaphorical one, sealing off the part of me that had tolerated being diminished, the part that had made excuses for my own daughter's slow, creeping cruelty. My mind drifted back. Before Julian, Ava would call me Maman. in that soft, lilting way that was unique to her. After her father died, we were two halves of a whole grief. She slept in my bed for a week, her small hand clutching mine in the dark. We wept into mugs of chicory coffee, sorting through Robert's old books, the scent of paper and time, a comforting balm. Julian moved in less than 2 months later, ostensibly to provide support, but his support felt more like an occupation. He began a quiet campaign of psychological warfare. He'd rearrange rooms, then act surprised when I couldn't find things, making me feel forgetful, old. He started calling me Clara, a deliberate stripping away of my maternal title, and Ava, my sweet Ava, let him. I became the invisible engine of the house, stocking the pantry, paying the bills, tending the garden, while they slowly wrote me out of the script of their lives. The breaking point, the moment I knew I had to find a different path, was when I overheard him on the phone in the courtyard. He was laughing. "Yeah, she's still here, puttering around in the dependency," he'd said to some friend. But not for long. Ava's finally realizing it's time to streamline things. You can't have a masterpiece cluttered with relics. Relic, that's what I was to him, a piece of old furniture to be discarded. I didn't cry. I didn't confront him. I retreated to my room and unearthed the envelope Robert had given me. It wasn't just the deed. Tucked inside was a letter, written in his familiar, elegant script. "My dearest Clara, this house is our fortress, and you are its queen. Never let anyone make you feel like a guest within its walls, not even our own blood. If Ava ever forgets who she is, it is your duty to remind her forcefully of who you are. Defend your space. Your voice is not negotiable." Still, I had waited. I gave them one last chance with the Napa trip, a final extravagant test of their character, a test they had failed spectacularly. My phone buzzed again, pulling me back to the present. A new text from Ava. "Mamang, please, we need to talk, just the two of us." My thumb hovered over the screen. Then I typed a reply. "The Camellia Grill. Noon tomorrow. No sentiment, no softness. Just a time and a place." If she wanted to talk, she would do it on my terms, in a place of my choosing. The next day, I sat at a small table by the window of the old diner, a place we used to go for milkshakes when she was a girl. She arrived late, hiding behind oversized sunglasses, her posture radiating a defensive tension. She slid into the booth across from me. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, the words feeling rehearsed. I didn't respond. I simply took a slow sip of my iced tea. "I didn't know Julian sent that text," she insisted. "I swear I wanted you to be there." I raised an eyebrow. "And when you landed in California and saw that I wasn't on the plane, did you call? Did you text to see if I was okay? Did you ask where your mother was?" Her silence was a confession. "Maman, look," she began, her voice pleading. "He's just particular. He comes from a different world." "So do I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "I come from a world where you don't abandon the person who gave you life, especially not after they've paid for your vacation." A flush of shame colored her cheeks. "I didn't know you felt so erased. You knew I cut her off. You just didn't care enough to stop it. You changed, Ava, and I kept looking for my daughter inside the cold stranger you've become, but I can't find her anymore." "You really sold it," she whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Yes." "Where? Where are we supposed to go?" she asked, the question laced with a pathetic helplessness I'd never heard from her before. "You have a husband. You have a master's degree in art history. You'll figure it out," I said, my voice flat. Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm not a bad person," she whispered. I got lost. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't need to." I stood up from the table. "I truly hope you find your way back, sweetheart," I said gently. And then I walked out of the diner, leaving her alone with the consequences of her choices. That evening, I received a call from Mr. Henderson. The Tulane professor and his wife wanted to meet me. They love the courtyard garden, he said. They want to hear its stories. A genuine smile touched my lips for the first time in days. "Set it up, Mark." I stepped out onto the tiny porch of the Garkanier and looked up at the sky, a canvas of bruised purple and dusky orange, and then I heard it, a soft, hesitant knock. I turned. It was Ava. She stood there clutching something in her hands. It was the old leather-bound family photo album, the one I thought Julian had convinced her to throw away. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice small and broken. I looked at her, at the album, at the chasm of pain that lay between us. I didn't answer, not yet. I stood there in the doorway, the scent of night-blooming jasmine hanging heavy in the air, a silent sentinel to our standoff. The photo album in Ava's hands was more than just a book. It was a relic from a life that felt 1,000,000 miles away. Its leather cover was frayed, its corners soft from 1,000 turnings of pages filled with moments I had thought were lost to her. She clutched it like a shield, or perhaps like a peace offering. "Can I come in?" she asked again, her voice a mere whisper now, stripped of the brittle confidence she had worn like armor. I finally stepped aside, a silent concession. She entered the small space, her eyes taking in the cramped quarters I had called home for months. She saw the single armchair, the hot plate on the counter, the books stacked in neat piles on the floor. This wasn't a home, it was a holding cell, and the reality of it seemed to land on her with a physical weight. She sank onto the edge of my bed, placing the album in her lap. "I found this in the back of the storage unit," she said, her gaze fixed on the cover. "I thought Julian had gotten rid of it." "I thought so too," I replied, taking a seat in the armchair opposite her. Slowly, she opened it. The first page held a photo of her at 3 years old, her face smeared with beignet sugar, a goofy grin revealing 2 missing front teeth. Robert was holding her, his own face alight with a pure, uncomplicated love. "I miss him," she whispered. My throat tightened. "He would be so disappointed in you, Ava." The words were stark, unvarnished. She flinched, but didn't argue. She knew it was true. She turned the page. A long silence stretched, filled only by the chirping of crickets in the courtyard. "You were always there," she finally said, her voice thick with emotion as she stared at a photo of me, helping her with a disastrous school science project. "I see that now. You made everything feel safe. Until Julian made you feel that I was the thing to be protected from, I finished for her." Her eyes shot to mine, filled with a familiar defensiveness, but I held her gaze. "You let a man come into our lives and convince you that your own mother was a liability." She nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Of being alone," she admitted, her voice cracking. "Of choosing wrong, of not being enough for him." I took a deep, steadying breath. "My darling girl, you were already enough. You chose to become less." Her hands trembled. I didn't realize it was happening. At first, it was just opinions. He was just being protective, I told myself, and then he was making all my decisions. And I let him. I let him push you into this little room. I told myself you were strong enough to handle it. "I shouldn't have had to be," I replied, my voice quiet but firm. "I know," she whispered. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know. I remember who I am, and I remember who you are." I looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time in a long time. The harsh, brittle shell was gone. In its place was the girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. But I was wiser now. Love couldn't simply pave over the chasm of betrayal. "How did Julian react," I asked, "when he found out I'd sold the house?" A bitter, humorless smile touched her lips. He was apoplectic. He accused me of failing to manage the situation, said I should have gotten you to sign over the deed months ago. I nodded slowly. "And what did you say?" "I told him," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of its old strength, "that he was the situation and that he needed to pack his bags." My eyebrows shot up. "You left him?" "I told him to go to a hotel to give me space to figure out who I am without his voice in my head." She looked up, her eyes pleading. "What do you want now?" I asked. "I want to earn my way back. I want you back in my life, not because you have to, but because I'm willing to do the work." My heart ached. I stood and walked to my small dresser, retrieving the folder containing Robert's letter. I placed it in front of her. "Your father left this for me." With the deed, her fingers, hesitant at first, opened the folder. She read the words her father had written, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Defend your space. Your voice is not negotiable." She closed the folder, clutching it to her chest. "I forgot," she cried. "I forgot who I was, and I forgot who you are." "I didn't," I said softly. A long moment passed. Ava looked around the tiny room, truly seeing it now, not as a guest suite, but as my gilded cage. "You've been here all this time." "Yes," I said, waiting, but I was done begging for a seat at my own table. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice trembling. I thought for a moment. The future and uncharted territory. "Now," I said, "you go figure out who you are when no one is telling you. And if you still want to rebuild this, you can come back. But you come back as an equal. You don't show up only when you're scared. You show up when things are hard and you stay." She nodded, wiping her tears. Can I leave this here?" she asked, holding up the photo album. I paused, then took its familiar weight from her hands. "Yes." She stood, hesitating at the door. "Thank you, Mama, for opening the door tonight. Good night, Ava." After she left, I sat in the stillness, the photo album heavy on my lap. I turned a page and saw a picture of her dressed as a sunflower for a kindergarten play, her smile radiant and unguarded. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I let myself weep, not for the pain, but for the possibility of release. Somewhere beyond the wrought iron gates, beyond the broken years, I felt the quiet stirring of something new, a fragile dawn after a long and starless night. The next morning, I met the new owners. The Tulane professor and his wife were kind, their eyes filled with a genuine respect for the house and its history. We walked through the courtyard together. "This garden feels like it was loved for a very long time," the wife said, touching a fragrant gardenia blossom. "We promised to be good stewards of it. That's all I ever wanted," I said, and I meant it. When I returned to the garçonnière, Darren was there, waiting for me like a storm cloud. "I need to talk to you," he began, his voice laced with aggression. I held up a hand, stopping him. "No, Julian, you need to leave. You have no right to be on this property. You lost that privilege. You can't be serious. What about Ava? What about me? We poured our lives into this place." I laughed, a short, sharp, humorless sound. "No, Julian, I poured my life into this place. Robert and I did. You just decorated it." His face contorted with rage. "You manipulated my daughter. You isolated her. You tried to turn her into a weapon against me. You thought you could erase me, but you miscalculated. You mistook my kindness for weakness. You'll regret this," he hissed. "No," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "I regret letting it go on for so long. I didn't want revenge, Julian. I wanted respect. And when I realized I would never get it from you, I chose peace instead." He stared at me, defeated, the bully finally facing a wall he couldn't break. He turned and walked away without another word. I closed the door, my heart pounding with the fierce, liberating thrill of a battle finally won. Weeks turned into months. Ava didn't move back in. Instead, she got a small apartment of her own downtown and found a job at a women's shelter. She started therapy. She started the hard, unglamorous work of rebuilding herself from the ground up. She would come over on Sundays. We'd sit in my tiny courtyard, not talking about the past, but tentatively building a new present. One Sunday, she came with an envelope in her hand. "What's this?" I asked. "It's a lease," she said, a proud, nervous smile on her face. "For a little 2-bedroom cottage on the other side of the garden district. I can afford it on my own. And I was hoping you'd be my roommate." Tears sprang to my eyes. "You bought us a home." She nodded. "I wanted you to have a place you didn't have to fight for, a a place that's yours simply because you are loved and you deserve it. I hugged her, my daughter, my strong, resilient, returning daughter. As I stood in the doorway of our new home a month later, watching her plant new rose bushes in our small front garden, I finally understood. It was never about the house or the vacation. It was about the sacred space a person occupies in their own life. It was about the line between love and ownership, between support and control. And sometimes the most profound act of love is to burn everything down to save the one thing that truly matters. Sometimes you have to lose a house to find a home. And sometimes when someone who got lost finds their way back, not with excuses, but with a new map they drew themselves, you don't just open the door. You build a new one together.